Okay. We are okay. So we're ready here. We're all set. Okay. So what we're going to discuss is the President Trump's decision to recognize Yerushalayim as the capital of Israel. Okay. So the first thing we're going to have to do is discuss just a little history of Jerusalem. Okay. So Yerushalayim is our capital. Let's put it that way. The Jewish people's capital, right? That's something that we're not going to question. And the reason we're not going to question that is because our tradition has it going all the way back to Cain and Hevel when they gave their sacrifices, and and all the way up to the sacrifice of Yitzchak, right? Kedas Yitzchak, the sacrifice of Isaac. That our tradition goes back so many different points, all the way until King David saved up enough money, captured Yerushalayim, gave his son Solomon Shlomo the ability to build a temple, and the first temple was built, and the first Commonwealth, the first time that the Jewish people were in control from Jerusalem, was the seat of the capital. So it was the seat of the Jewish country was in Jerusalem. So that's our history going back. A lot of people today will say, well, that was ancient history. That has nothing to do with the modern state of Israel. The modern state of Israel starts in 1948. We've discussed many times how the modern state of Israel isn't, in our minds, isn't something that was created in 1948, but rather was something that goes all the way back to this time. It's just that that's when the world recognized our rights to the Jewish state and recognized our rights to this land as our land. So the history of Jerusalem goes back 3,000 years, while on the other hand, Islam, which only started about 1,400 years ago, never saw Jerusalem as their capital. They never said that, we're going to have a capital in Jerusalem. The capital of their religion is Mecca, and the next holy city that they have is in Medina. And the third holiest city is in Jerusalem. When they literally pray, when they pray in Jerusalem, they have they turn around and face backwards towards Jerusalem and face south towards Mecca and Medina. So this isn't, to them, Jerusalem is a holy city, what they call it, but it's not a central city in terms of the way that it is to Judaism. So that's the history of Jews in Jerusalem, and in fact, I don't know of a time that there hasn't been Jews in Jerusalem, and for most of history, Jerusalem has been a majority Jewish residence. Even when Muslims controlled Jerusalem and controlled what was then called Palestine, right? So that's not that right. That's not. It was still majority of Jews were the residents there. Okay. In 1948, the United Nations decided to partition the land of Israel and or Palestine at that time, and give half to the Jews and half to the Arabs. It was really 55% to the Arabs and 55% to the Jews and 45% to the Arabs. The Jews declared their independence against Arab threats and called their new country Israel. Jerusalem was supposed to be a international city. It wasn't supposed to be half Jewish, half Arab. It was supposed to be this sort of international city that neither belonged to the Arabs nor to the Jews, and in this way everybody would have freedom of access to their holy sites. The Christians would be able to visit their holy sites, Muslims would be able to visit their holy sites, and Jews would be able to visit their holy sites. That was the idea. Instead of that actually happening, in 1948 war broke out, and the city was split into West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. Okay? West Jerusalem is what we're familiar with today when you come into the city and you see like the Cords Bridge, that new bridge that they have with the strings, right? What's called Cords Bridge at the entrance. So that's the entrance to West Jerusalem. You're coming in from the west, you're coming in from Tel Aviv, just to give you some geography so you're familiar with it. That's the newer part of the city. Ben Yehuda Street and Ben Yehuda Street and I'm trying to think like Yafo, all the streets that you're familiar with, where Machane Yehuda is, the Shuk, all those places are the new part of the city. When you hit if you're walking, I don't know how familiar this is going to be to you, but if you walk down Yaffo towards the old city, and you enter and you come towards the old city, you hit a street. That street that crosses over Yaffo, as you see the old city walls, that's the start of East Jerusalem. That was the demarcation line. That's where there was a fence set up, and beyond that fence was East Jerusalem. That's where that became what the Jordanians took over. Jordanian snipers sat on top of that. On top of those fences, on top of the walls, and would shoot down at any Jew that passed by, let alone allowing anybody to come in. From 1948 to 1967, no Jew was allowed into East Jerusalem, and the Jewish sites were desecrated. Jewish cemeteries and gravestones were pulled out, and they were used in people's houses and used specifically in people's bathrooms. The Western Wall was used as a garbage dump. Right? These were not. Our sites were not treated respectfully, and of course, nobody was allowed to use these sites. No Jews were allowed to enter. So for 19 years, from 1948 until 1967, no Jews were allowed in. The city was split into two parts: West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. Okay, so I'm hoping that's clear so far. Okay. In 1967 was the 6-Day War. In the 6-Day War, Israeli forces, right, the IDF, captured what we call the Old City. That's in our minds, like, oh, the Old City. They captured the Old City, and the Kotel was in our hands, right? Har Habayit Biyadenu, the Temple Mount was in our hands, right? So we were all very excited, right? We get the Old City. So we were very excited about that. But there was much more than just the Old City. We captured all of East Jerusalem. We also captured the entire West Bank, right? But we captured all of East Jerusalem. So there were many. This is where it starts getting a little complicated here, because because there are Arab neighborhoods, right, that obviously Arabs lived in because they lived in parts of Jerusalem, right? So you have the Muslim quarter in the Old City, but there's also neighborhoods like Shuafat and Isawiya. These are Arab neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, which, the average American tourist doesn't visit these places, right? The average Israeli also doesn't visit these places. I drive every day on my way to work. I drive between Isawiya and Shuafat on a road that cuts between them and a tunnel that drives me under Shuafat, because if I drove through Shuafat, I would be stoned. So literally, so you need to have sort of like separations and barriers set up around these Arab neighborhoods. Okay, once Israel was founded in 1948, if we take a step back, David Ben-Gurion announced that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. And he said, we're not listening to this whole thing from the United Nations that it's an international city. Jerusalem is our capital. At that point, we only had West Jerusalem. East Jerusalem, again, was under the Jordanians. But we moved the Knesset there. We moved the Prime Minister's residence there. We set up the Supreme Court there. That's where everything was set up. The seat of our government was set up in East Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, and that became our capital. Okay. In 1967, we then opened up the capital. Right. We opened up Jerusalem, and it became now one united city. Right? That's when you hear the words, an eternal united capital, what it means is that we're joining West and East Jerusalem together. The State of Israel does not recognize a split between East and West Jerusalem. It annexed the entire city. It considers the entire city part of one Yerushalayim. Keep in mind, the Kotel, the Western Wall, and the Temple Mount is part of the eastern part of the city. So to recognize a split would in essence be saying we recognize that the Kotel, that the Western Wall and the Old City is not really part of Jerusalem. Obviously, for any Jew, that's impossible, right? The Western Wall and the Old City is part of what we consider Yerushalayim. So we recognize no split. Once 1967 happened, and once we annexed the eastern part of the city and made it part of Israel, again, against the international community wishes, right? The international community said, wait a minute, how could you go ahead and do that? You can't go ahead and annex that. That's not yours. That was supposed to be either an international city or now, by the way, I'm broadcasting this live on my Facebook page also. and I have a Palestinian Facebook friend who's writing that I'm spreading poison and distorting history. So we commonly have these debates about who's distorting history and who's not. But I don't think I've said anything so far that's distorting history. But in any case, the idea is that at that point we took over East Jerusalem, we annexed East Jerusalem, and then we started moving people in. And we didn't move people into Shuafat and Isawiyah, right, into the Arab neighborhoods, but what we started doing was we started creating our own neighborhoods inside of Jerusalem. These were brand new neighborhoods inside Jerusalem, which obviously upset a lot of people, especially in the international community. The international community calls these new Jewish neighborhoods settlements. Okay, just like I live in a settlement, they consider these Jewish neighborhoods in East Jerusalem settlements as well. So I'll name you some of them, and those are Gilo and Pisgat Zev and Gilo, Pisgat Zev. I'm trying to think of others. They're slipping my mind. But these are portions of Talpiot. These are neighborhoods that we're all familiar with, that we know. Right, that are technically, right, Beit Hanina is another one that are technically part of East Jerusalem that the world considers settlements. Ramat Rachel, if you remember Joe Biden, I don't think you guys remember this, you were a little too young, but Joe Biden visited Jerusalem, and the day he visited, the Jerusalem municipality announced that they were building 2,000 more homes in Ramat Rachel, and Joe Biden took that as an insult because he said, how could you announce new building of settlements while I'm here trying to be this in-between mediator, right? And said that you couldn't do it. So that's the makeup of Jerusalem. That's what Yerushalayim is made up of today. Two parts, which Israel considers one part, and that's our position, and we're not moving back from it. Okay, we're not going to do it. Now, certain Israeli prime ministers have put Yerushalayim on the table. Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak both gave Yerushalayim as a possibility of being put up as a part of negotiating a two-state solution. The Palestinians consider Jerusalem their capital, just like we do. Okay, that's the idea. Everybody understand? Okay, so that's so the Palestinians want East Jerusalem back because they say it's supposed to be theirs. In truth, East Jerusalem was never supposed to be Palestinian. It was supposed to be an international city. So it's very hard for anybody to say that Palestine is the capital Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, which you see on signs nowadays, because that was never supposed to be, and the Palestinians never thought it was supposed to be their capital until they made that up. So that is the idea. Okay. In 1995, Congress passed a law. Okay, the law stated that, what does it mean? International city is a city that would be administered by, like, the United Nations. They would have the United Nations soldiers in there. They would have the United Nations municipality, like the United Nations mayor, and they would be running the city. Okay, and it's essentially Disneyland, right? Like, anybody can come in. It's run by like happy people in blue uniforms. They greet you at the door, and you can come in as long as you don't cause any trouble, and then you can go wherever you want. Right? That was the idea of the one happy Jerusalem. It just never happened. Okay. Okay, that's odd. Okay, so. And my screen NCSY just went black, but okay. So then in 1995, we had Congress, the United States Congress passed a law that said that the United States should recognize Jerusalem as the capital. Now, when I say the word should, I'm very careful there, because Congress does not control foreign policy of the United States. The Constitution splits up the roles, right? So foreign policy is given to the executive, that's the president, okay? And Congress controls the purse strings. They control how much the president can spend on different things, okay? But it's the president that gets to control what foreign policy is, not Congress. But Congress said, they passed a law that said that America should recognize Jerusalem as the capital and should move, because all embassies are based in the capital. They should move their capital to Jerusalem. Okay, and they set aside funding for that. Now, in any type of law that Congress passes that affects foreign policy, Congress puts in a waiver on purpose, meaning that for the president. So since the president is in charge of foreign policy, right? Since they're in charge of foreign policy, so the president can say it's not in the national security interests to follow this law. Built into the law is the allowance for the president to sign a waiver to say that, and as long as he signs that waiver, so then the president is always going to, as long as he signs that waiver, the president's always going to be able to say, I'm not moving the embassy, and that's part of the law. Presidents Clinton, Bush, and Obama, and President Trump the first time, all signed that waiver, meaning they said that we would like to move the embassy, but it's not in the national security interests of the United States. The president, when he signs that waiver, does not have to explain why he's signing the waiver. He does not have to say why he feels it's not in the national interests of the United States. The obvious explanation every single time was the United States, as a broker between the Palestinians and the Israelis, did not want to choose a side, meaning that the decision has come to be that there's not going to be, Jerusalem's never going to be an international city, but its final status, what it will end up being, right now it's in limbo, it's disputed, we don't consider it disputed, but the world does, will be decided between the Israelis and the Palestinians. If you ask Bibi Netanyahu, he would say, yes, it's going to be decided that it'll be a united Jewish city. That's it, right? If you ask some more left-wing Israeli politicians, they would say, well, maybe we would give back some of Jerusalem, and some of Jerusalem could become a Palestinian capital. But the United States announcing that Jerusalem is going to be the capital of Israel would be deciding one way over the other. It would be deciding that, okay, we're not going to wait for final status negotiations. We're going to declare already that this is the capital of Israel. So that's why all the presidents have been hesitant to make that decision. Now, every single president that's come to visit Israel does not say, well, I can't go see you in Jerusalem, right? No president has come to the West Bank to visit a settlement, right? By doing so, that would be tacitly agreeing to the settlements. They would be saying that, yes, there are settlements, and yes, we're pro-settlement. So no president has done that, because that would be political suicide for a president to be recognizing the settlements as part of Israel. So no president does that. But no president has ever said, I can't come to Jerusalem. When presidents have addressed the Knesset, they've spoken obviously in Jerusalem. When they meet with the prime minister, they speak in Jerusalem. President Obama, President Bush, President Clinton, they all spoke in Jerusalem. President Trump, when he came to visit, they all spoke in Jerusalem. There's no written rule that they can only go to Tel Aviv. That doesn't exist. Jerusalem is de facto you could say the acting capital of Israel, right? No matter what anybody says. Okay, so the president, when he made this decision, all he did was recognize a practical and historical fact. Practically, even if you have the most left-wing prime minister who decides to give up all of East Jerusalem, the Western Wall, the Old City, the Temple Mount, Gilo, Pisgat Zev, all the neighborhoods that we listed, and decides to give up all those neighborhoods, West Jerusalem will still remain Israel's capital. Ben Yehuda Street is always going to look like Ben Yehuda Street. Rehov Yafo is always going to look like Rehov Yafo. Those will always be the Tachana Merkazit, the Cords Bridge. All of these places will always remain part of Jerusalem and will always be an Israeli capital. So the president sits there and says, listen, Jerusalem is going to be a part of Israel. We might as well just say what it is. Now, this is also one of the president's big campaign promises, that he was going to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and he was going to move the embassy. So for the president, this is more than just, okay, we have to recognize a practical and historic reality, but for him it was keeping a promise that he had made to those who elected him. And he said, listen, this is what I stand for, this is who I am, and vote for me because of this. So for him not to do it would be going back on a campaign promise. He felt that President Obama, Bush, and Clinton all went back on campaign promises because they all campaigned to do this and they didn't do it. He used the word cowardly. Okay, so that was and this was, for him, it was a courageous move to go ahead and do this. Okay, let's move forward. The question is, why did the president do this? Right? Why did the president feel that it was in the national interest of the United States for the president to do this? Many people said the president shouldn't do this because if the president did do this, then the peace process would be over. The president took a totally different view on this, and it's very unique. And who knows if it'll work? But the president feels that we've been hesitant to announce real things and announce practical realities because we're always scared of what the Palestinians are going to do, what the Arab Street is going to do. And what we've essentially done is we've fed the beast. We've essentially said that if you don't negotiate, if you don't take steps forward, we'll just kowtow to you. And every time the Palestinians have said we don't want to negotiate, Israel's had to do something to entice them to come back to the table. They've had to release prisoners. They've had to stop settlement building. Whatever it is, the Palestinians at certain times will always say, why don't you, in order for us to come back to the table, you must, do X, Y, or Z. So the president is looking at this and saying, wait a minute, hold on a second. That was a good theory that it could work, but it's been 25 years since Oslo was signed. It's been 25 years since we said we're part of this peace process. 25 years, at a certain point, you got to say, look, that's not working, right? You can't keep doing the same exact things and expecting something else to happen, right? Like, why would something else happen now? Why would anything change? So the president said, listen, it's just not changing. This is not going to be any different, and we're going to have to do something different now. And the president said that he is committed to peace between the Israelis and Palestinians and feels that this will actually get us closer to peace. Now, if you ask the average Palestinian, who's now they've cut off ties with the United States, right? Vice President Pence is coming here next week, and Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, canceled his meeting with Vice President Pence, which is a big spit in the face of the United States of America. That doesn't make anybody happy, right? So in that case, right, but the president still feels that this will maybe light a fire and take a different approach, and maybe it'll work. I have an interesting point. People say, well, this is crazy. You don't know what's going to happen. It's true. We don't know what's going to happen. That's very true. But keep in mind one thing, okay? The negotiating with the Palestinians, directly negotiating what we've done for the last 25 years, has brought us 20,000 rockets, bus bombings, stabbing attacks, shootings, and an intifada. One-on-one talks with the Palestinians has brought us terrorism, clearly. Right? This, maybe it'll bring terrorism, maybe it won't, but we already have terrorism, right? We're already dealing with terrorism. To think that this is going to incite more violence, I mean, on what metric and what scale are we using, right? So I asked I was on a phone call with the president's advisors, and I asked them, was violence considered when you're making this decision? Was an increase in violence considered? And the answer was yes. And I said, okay, that's bold. Did you consult with the Israelis on this? And did the Israelis still say they wanted America to make this decision? And the answer was yes. So the state of Israel, right, you can't run a country, especially Israel, you can't run a country on fear. You can't say we're going to hold back for what we believe is correct because we're scared that the Palestinians are going to do something. It's why we have an army. It's why we have one of the best armies in the world. Because that way our country can do the right thing and advance its national interests without having to worry about the repercussions of such an action. The last question I asked them was, did you discuss violence with the Palestinians? Did you say to the Palestinians, listen, we know that there might be those that are going to take drastic action. We want you to make sure that they're not going to, and you're going to play a role in stopping them. They said, yes, we gave that announcement to the Palestinians. I would call it a warning, right, to make sure that they're not inciting violence. I don't know if you could say that. We've only, thank God, I say only, right, it's easy for me to say only. I'm not the guy sitting in the hospital bed right now, but we've only had one terrorist attack since this announcement. We've had 6 rockets, and in fact, 15 minutes ago, a rocket was knocked down by Iron Dome on the way to Sderot. But Friday night, a rocket hit a kindergarten in Sderot. Thank God it was on a Friday night, and no one was in the kindergarten, but because that could have been horrific. But when you look at this, it's very hard to say, and I think this was the president's thinking. Again, it's purely speculation on my part, but you really can't hesitate in the face of fear, in the face of threats, because then they own you, and then you can never do what you feel is right for your country. Okay. Now, the question that you could ask is, why now? Why did the president, of all the times in the world, why did the president sign why did he make this declaration now? Well, if you remember, when we talked about the bill that was passed in 1995, we said the president has a waiver that he could sign that says that it's not in the national security interest of the United States for the embassy to be moved and for Yerushalayim to be declared the capital. So every 6 months, that waiver has to be signed by the president. December 4th was the deadline for signing that waiver. The president had to either sign the waiver or not sign the waiver. The minute the president doesn't sign the waiver, an embassy must open immediately in Yerushalayim. It could be in somebody's apartment. It could be, right? It doesn't have to be a huge embassy, but something has to open right away to be called an embassy. That has to happen immediately. So on December 4th, the president had a choice to make. He had to open up that embassy. So the waiver was coming up, and I think the president was sick and tired of signing these waivers when he was committed and wanted to really move and fulfill his campaign promise and say that Jerusalem was the capital. Okay. Now, what's interesting is that the president has to keep signing the waivers because the president doesn't want to open up a temporary embassy. He wants to open up a real embassy. A real embassy will take between 2 and 5 years to open up. Some people think between 5 and 10 years to open up based on the security needs. Right? Real estate agents in Talpiot, where the embassy is going to be moving, are already ecstatic about the real estate prices. They've already started going up because when an embassy moves into your neighborhood, you have heightened security, so it's a safer place to live. It's also more prestigious. There's also going to be 1,000 people that are going to have to move into that neighborhood soon because they work at the United States Embassy. So it's a lot of logistics. It takes a couple of years. But the president has to keep signing the waiver. You see, a lot of people said that the president is a liar because he signed the waiver anyway. The way the laws worked out in 1995, the way it's written, the president has to sign a waiver because the minute he doesn't sign that waiver, then an embassy must, by law, the president must open an embassy by the next day. He wants to open up a proper embassy. So you'll see over the next couple of years, President Trump is going to keep signing that waiver until the opening ceremony of that embassy, of which we have absolutely no idea when it's going to be. One interesting thing, a year and a half ago, an American citizen who lives here in Israel, whose children were born in Jerusalem, sued the United States State Department because the United States State Department, when it issues our passports here, you can get a passport issued outside of America, right? And the embassy, you can get your passport renewed. And if you have a child here, I've had 3 children here. If you have a child here, on the birth certificate it says Jerusalem. It says the city that your child is born in. Now, if your child is born in Tel Aviv or Ashdod, it says Tel Aviv, Israel, Ashdod, Israel. If your child, like mine, where we're born in Jerusalem, your birth certificate and passport only say Jerusalem. It does not say Jerusalem, Israel. Right, so now that Jerusalem has been recognized as the capital of Israel, the question is, will those certificates and will those documents change? For the meantime, they're not changing. Right, so that doesn't take away from the fact. Right, a lot of people say, oh, well, then it's not really, America didn't really recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel if they won't put it down on a passport. No, they're 2 different things. Right, that's and why the State Department's not changing it, I have no idea. The State Department themselves didn't give an explanation, only to say that not changing it doesn't mean anything. Same thing with maps. The United States puts out maps. Right? The United States government puts out maps. So the question is there going to be a star next to Jerusalem which shows that it's the capital of Israel? Right? In every map that America's put out, there's been no star listed. There's been no stars listed. So will American government maps, will they change? So right now, those are not changing either. Okay. Lastly, the most important thing is, what boundaries does America recognize now as the borders, as the city borders, the municipal borders of Yerushalayim, right? Every city has borders to it, okay? Now, this is very important. What are Jerusalem's borders, right? Are Jerusalem's borders now including the east part of the city, right? Does America consider Jerusalem's borders, right, including the east part, or does America's borders only stop halfway? President Trump was very careful when he made his proclamation that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, not to say West or East Jerusalem. Right? President Putin of Russia 3 months ago recognized West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So he was very clear. We recognize West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. We do not recognize East Jerusalem as the capital of Israel because the Palestinians claim it to be theirs. Right? Putin didn't recognize East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine, but he just said, well, that's up for something else, but I'm recognizing West Jerusalem. President Trump didn't differentiate West, East. So some people can say, well, he means it all, right? The United States is not making a declaration as to what they consider the borders of Jerusalem. All they're saying is, there is a city, its name is Jerusalem, it is in Israel, it is now the capital of Israel. What those borders are going to be, that has to be worked out between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Okay, so that's a fascinating decision, and that's how President Trump says, listen, can the city be divided? What's President Trump's answer? Whatever the Israelis and Palestinians want. If they want to divide the city, they can divide it. I'm not going to tell them they shouldn't, right? I'm not going to tell them they should, right? Whatever they want to do, they can do. But right now, the United States is only recognizing right now that there is a city. It is called Jerusalem. It is the capital of Israel. Its borders are not yet defined, right? And and we're not changing anything on passports or on maps. And that, my friends, is the end of my presentation on the embassy move. If you have any questions, I will take them now. Okay, so I guess we can end here. Okay, very good. I get to go to sleep. It's now 1 a.m. here. Okay, so guys, I hope that was informative for you. You now know more than there's two good things. You now know more than 90% of the world about Jerusalem and the embassy. But more than knowing more than 90% of the world, you now know truth from fiction. There's a lot of fiction out there. There's a lot of lies being spread. And you now know what's true and what's not true. So somebody comes to you and says, like, oh, America didn't really recognize Jerusalem as the capital because they're not changing the passports. Well, no, that's not true. That's not what they said at all. They simply said that they're recognizing the city and not changing documents, but that doesn't mean that they're not recognizing the city as the capital. Good? Okay? There's a lot of fiction out there. You now know the truth. Guys, have a wonderful week and a happy Hanukkah. Bye, guys.